is more wise than the wisest thing than you or I could ever come up with. We mentioned that the other week as well. But it's an important concept to keep in mind. So as we look at this section that Steve read for us earlier, 7 things God hates. Talking about what God hates. Well, isn't that a fun way to start off your Sunday morning, right? Hope he doesn't hate me. Hope he doesn't hate you. That's not what we're talking about here, okay? Let's take a look at the passage. And again, this is from NIV. Take a look at the passage and get a sense of what it is that God is saying to us here. Okay, oops. Sorry. I knew something was a bit weird. There we go. All right, so what is it that God hates? There are 6 things, okay? There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. Now, sometimes the Bible does this. In the book of Amos, God announces his judgment upon different groups, such as the Assyrians, the Persians, you got the people from Syria, and he will say, for 3 things, okay, even for 4 I will judge these people, and he lists the 4 things. So for some reason, it's sort of like sneaking up on it. So he says, there are 6 things the Lord hates. There are 7 that are detestable to him. It's kind of a literary device. Now, these are the things that he says are detestable to God. Number 1, haughty eyes. We don't use that word very often. Haughty eyes. A lying tongue. Hands that shed innocent blood. A heart that devises wicked schemes. Feet that are quick to rush into evil. A false witness who pours out lies. And a person who stirs up conflict in the community. These are 7 things that God hates. Now, let's think about this for a little bit in terms of, when I think about God, if I were to ask you, what is a characteristic or what is the characteristic of God that that most stands out for you? You would probably say something like, well, he's holy, or he's righteous, or he's loving. God is love, right? That's probably what you would say. I don't think you would say that God hates. Okay? Now, I looked through, I was trying to get a hold of a number of times, and I didn't come up with a precise number, but there are a lot of times that God is described as being loving and shows his love and all that sort of stuff. But there's not a whole lot that talks about God hating. It's there, and it's important that we take it seriously. But there's not a lot of it, all right? So let's ask some questions here. What does it mean for God to hate, okay? I was in a play when I was in college called The Curious Savage, and there was one lady called Mrs. Patty. It was a community about, it was a play about a bunch of people who are in a place because they have mental challenges and stuff like that. And there was one lady whose name was Mrs. Patty, and she never really had any lines much to speak of at all. It was a play about people who were kind of crazy, so they naturally thought about casting me. That's probably more truth to that than I want to admit. But Mrs. Patty, she would have this line where she'd be painting, and the characters would be going back and forth having their conversations, and all of a sudden it would pause, and she would walk to the front of the stage, and she'd look at the audience, and she'd say, "I hate everything in the world. But most of all, I hate," and then she'd list like 25 things she hated. I mean, it was a line you don't need to really memorize. You could say pretty much anything, I hate noisy mufflers. I hate fireworks that make all kind of noise when I'm trying to sleep at night. Just to pick a couple of random things that I don't know. And then she would go back to her painting, and nobody really paid any attention to her. Then you kind of realize this was her little issue, She had a lot of pent-up hatred. Right? She didn't like all kinds of things. Okay? Now, we might expect someone who's not exactly functioning normally to say, "I hate everything in the world." But you wouldn't necessarily expect for God to say, "I hate things." But when God is holy and righteous, well, he's going to have to hate something. Let's take a look at some thoughts here, okay? How is it that God hates when he is described in Scripture as the personification of love? Right? It's a fair question. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. That's 1 John 4:8. Well, if God loves, he loves his creation. He loves us. But then there are things that God hates or despises because they are contrary to his nature. I have seen a number of people over the years. I go on social media like Facebook or something like that, and they'll describe someone they know who has either passed away or who is struggling with a major health crisis. And then I'll see the hashtag cancer sucks, okay? Now, if you talk to them, they would say, cancer, I hate cancer. You can be a perfectly normal, well-adjusted person and hate cancer because cancer is despicable. My son went to college with a young man who is now a medical doctor, and he did a lot of work in pediatric medicine. And I was asking him about that. I said, what's that like? And he alluded to the fact that the doctors that work, like St. Jude Children's Hospital, for his classic example, for instance, when you work with children, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old children, it's one thing when someone who is in their 80s or 90s is diagnosed with cancer. They're getting older, their immune system's not as efficient, and it's still a horrible thing. But you look back and you say, well, it's really sad, but they did live 80, 90 years. When you go to a place like St. Jude Children's Hospital, where you have children who are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, who have been diagnosed with cancer and who sometimes can go into remission, sometimes can be healed, but a lot of times they don't. And you will find out that medical personnel who work in pediatric cancer wards often can't do it for very long. It's just too horrific. They find themselves hating cancer. Why do they hate cancer? Because they love kids. And again, the last thing, the thing that would seem to, how is this possible? How is this fair that a young child who doesn't even understand, in 2011, our Cornerstone men's basketball team won the NAI Division II National Championship, their second of 3 national championships. And the whole season was dedicated to a young man named Johnny Tice. Now, Johnny and his older brother Robbie had been ball boys for Cornerstones. They go to games, they warm up, they'd bring out the rack of basketballs, and they collect them up and put them away. It's a cool thing to do, In fact, I think it might have been his brother Robbie one time that, the guys would, the young boys, they'd sit there, and when the team would come out, they'd high-five not high-five because the boys are here and the players are here, So they'd low-five, all. And so I think it was Robbie one time, he's standing there, and the team comes out, and he's low-fiving all of them, and Johnny goes over and says, Robbie, that's the wrong team, and that's the other team. Okay? But over the course of the season, the boys dedicated that season to Johnny, and as the season wore on and as it became more and more obvious that this was a very good team that was going to contend for a national championship, it became more and more obvious that Robbie was not going to be with us much longer, or Johnny was not going to be with us much longer. And we got to Branson in March of 2011, and Johnny was barely communicative, really struggling, but we were able to do that for him. And one of the guys on our team won the most valuable player of the tournament, and he decided to give that honor, that trophy, big, like gold in basketball, gave it to Johnny. And the announcement was made over the PA system that Johnny was named the honorary MVP of the team. Johnny passed away about a month later. That had a profound effect on so many of us, not only on Johnny's family, but also on just all of us who were associated with the team. So you can understand why all of us, as we looked at Johnny and saw that he was not going to be with us much longer, we would say we hate cancer. That didn't make us bad people. We hated cancer because we saw what it did. So God hates certain things. God hates or despises whatever is contrary to his nature. He is holy, so he despises sin. He is righteous, so he despises sinfulness or disobedience. He is love, so he despises hate. He hates hate. That's almost ironic, isn't it? God always hates sin and wickedness. We're told specifically in the Bible that God hates idolatry. We are told that he hates child sacrifice. We know that many of the nations surrounding the people of Israel practiced human sacrifice, including young children. Sexual perversion, a number of other things are typically described as what God hates. Now, what God clearly does is he loves all the people of the world. That's what John 3:16 means. Probably the most famous, at least among Protestants, the most famous verse in the Bible. For God so loved the world, meaning the people of the world. Now, we are told not to love the world, but that means the worldly system, the world's values, the way the world does things, okay? God clearly loves all the people of the world. David writes this. He says, "You are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you." By contrast, of course, that's Psalm 5:4. By contrast, those who take refuge in God, he says, will be glad and will ever sing for joy. In fact, both Psalm 5 and Psalm 11 draw a stark contrast between the righteous, those who take refuge in God, and the wicked, those who rebel against God. The righteous and the wicked make different choices and have differing destinies. One will see the ultimate expression of God's love, and the other will know the ultimate expression of God's hatred. Now, if you want to look, I got these quotes from a website called gotquestions.org, and that's the URL. So this is going to be on the First Baptist ABC page, so you can look it up if you want. I don't want to pass it off as like, oh, look what I came up with. This is something that I read that I thought was helpful, and so I decided to share it with you, okay? Now, what are the 7 things God hates? One of them is haughty eyes, okay? That reminds me of my 6th grade teacher right there, let me tell you, okay? The martini and everything, you know. I remember reading Calvin and Hobbes. If you're not familiar with Calvin and Hobbes, you ought to be What's Wrong with You, okay? No. If Calvin and Hobbes, look it up on Google. One of my favorite comic strips, it's about a very sort of petulant, problematic little kid who's got this stuffed tiger that he imagines is real, and they have all this. And Calvin's school teacher is Miss Wormwood. Yes, that's intentional, okay? That's named after the book of Revelation. Now, if you've read C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters, you know that Screwtape and Wormwood are two devils demons have these conversations back and forth. So Calvin's school teacher was Miss Wormwood. Mine was, I'm not going to say her name. She's almost certainly no longer with us, because when I had her as a teacher back in about 1967, 68, she was probably my age or older at that point, so I'm sure she's no longer with us. But haughty eyes, okay, again, looking over her martini saying, oh my goodness, who do you think you are, okay? God hates it. God hates it when you and I act in a haughty or proud way. And the reason for this is very simple. We have nothing to be proud about. It's one thing, I suppose, or it would be one thing, I suppose, if you were proud and you had some sort of reason to be proud. The fact is, we don't. Now, we understand that we are all human beings. We are all made in the image of God, and so we have worth and we have value. It's very important to keep that in proper perspective. We are good creatures made in the image of God, but we are also stained by sin. So that has damaged us. That has caused us great harm. We are flawed in very profound ways. And in fact, there's nothing that we can do ourselves to fix the problem of sin with which we are overwhelmingly, attacked, or whatever term you want to use. But on the other hand, we do bear the image of God. That neighbor, that person that you work with, who may be difficult, who may have all kinds of issues, is made in the image of God, and we have to understand that. And that's a good thing. Doesn't mean that they're not without their flaws. So when we act in a proud or haughty way, when we do that, we have nothing to be proud of. Right? 1 Timothy 3:6 is a passage that I think is very helpful here. This is one that's widely discussed in a lot of circles. And 1 Timothy 3:6 says this. This is talking about the qualifications for an overseer or a bishop. These would be, in our day, like qualifications for a pastor or someone who is a member of the diaconate or church leader, something like that. He says this. He says, the one who is to be an overseer or a deacon must not be a recent convert, or they may become conceited and fall under the same judgment as the devil. In other words, you don't take someone who's newly saved, just trusted Christ as Lord and Savior, and you put them into positions of leadership. They need to grow, they need to mature, they need to understand the faith, and so forth. And then he says, if you do put a recent convert in that position, they might become conceited, which is another word for proud. And he says, fall under the same judgment as the devil. The Old King James Bible says, fall under the condemnation of the devil. That doesn't mean that they're condemned by the devil. It means they come under the same condemnation that the devil came upon when he said, I will be like the Most High, when he acted pridefully. He had, you read in, for instance, in the book of Jude, we read that the archangel Michael contended with the devil for the body of Moses. He said, he did not argue with him or fight or contend. He simply said, the Lord rebuke you. Because in Jude, one of the characteristics of those who are not men and women of faith is that they slander divine beings. They make nothing of it. They think it's ridiculous. And so what happens then is even the archangel Michael, who is much more powerful than you or I, did not suppose or take it upon himself to criticize or attack the devil, but instead simply said, God rebuke you. The sin of the devil was the sin of pride. The sin was, look at me, look what I can do. And that's what we need to avoid. Whenever we have haughty eyes, whenever we look at someone like, well, who do you think? What are you doing in my company? You're not even worthy, to sit at the same table with me. When you have that kind of attitude, God hates that because we have nothing to be proud about. My glory, your glory is when we glory in the Lord. It's glorying in him. And I love that song. I can't think right now of the artist. Some of you might know. If you know and you want to shout it out, go ahead. Okay. But the lines of the song are this: I'm just a nobody trying to tell everybody about somebody who saved my soul. Okay? Anybody recognize the artist from that? Okay. I don't either. So we're all in the same boat. See, we got nothing to be proud of. We can't remember that. But I love that phrase. I'm just a nobody. Now, I know what he means. He's not a nobody, but he means that by comparison, I'm just an average guy. I'm just a nobody trying to tell everybody about somebody who saved my soul. If we ever, at First Baptist Church, if we ever get to the point where we are more like this and not realizing that everything that we are, everything that we have comes from him, then we are sadly misinformed. Haughty eyes. There's no reason for us to be that way because we have nothing to be proud about. How about this? A lying tongue. Okay? Got your tongue all tied in knots there. Okay? All right. Lie comes from the heart, but it passes through the tongue. James has all kinds of interesting things to say about the tongue. With the same tongue, we praise God and we say terrible things about one another. We have all sorts of ideas. Our tongue is an unruly evil. It is full of deadly poison. James also talks about the fact that, it's a small matter. It's a small part of the body, but it can ignite an entire firestorm. So in James, he says, you got a horse, okay, big old, massive, strong horse. How do you move the horse? How do you stop him? How do you get him to go? How do you turn left, turn right? It's a small bit. It's found in the horse's mouth. A ship, okay, a boat, large thing, but it's steered by a rudder, and that rudder is relatively small. Right? Just takes that little item to just sort of move this big boat wherever it wants to go. What about a fire, okay? We've come through a lot recently, fire seasons, particularly out in the West. All it takes is one match thrown in the wrong place. All it takes is one campfire, and hundreds of thousands of acres can be burned. Well, that's what the tongue does. I would encourage all of us, and I would encourage myself, that if you're going to say something about someone else, I would encourage you two things. Number one, is it true? Just because you heard it doesn't mean it's true. It's like something's on the internet. Well, it's on the internet. It's got to be true, right? It has to be. There's some sort of special filter, right? When you put something on the internet, if it's false, they won't let it put it on the internet, right? If only that were the case, okay? No, the fact is that just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. Just because you heard somebody say it doesn't mean it's true. So is it true? Number two, is it appropriate? Is it really going to, is this something that you really need to share? Even if it is true? Discretion is the better part of valor. Right? A long time ago, I think Shakespeare, it's one of Shakespeare's plays. Okay? Discretion is the better part of valor. So watch what you say. Even if it's true, it may not be appropriate to say it. You don't need to say that. You don't need to mention that. Now, we also have to be careful. There are outright lies, and there is fudging the truth. Now, George Orwell, in his famous book, 1984, once said, if you say something, anything, long enough and loud enough, eventually everybody will believe it. There's a lot of truth to that. A lot of truth to that. So there are outright lies, and then there is fudging the truth. There is, we call them little white lies. Nothing white about them, but by that I mean in terms of, the purity of the color, right? White paper, okay? I just bought some new golf shoes a few months ago, and they're white. And I've used them 2 or 3 times. And they're not as white as they used to be, okay? If I weren't hitting the ball in all kinds of weird places, and having to go find it, that might be different. I heard Byron Nelson, the famous professional golfer, it was once said of him that he spent months, consecutive months, oftentimes on the golf tour, never getting sand or anything like that other than grass in his shoes because he hit the ball so well. So there are outright lies, and there is fudging the truth, right? What are some ways that we lie? The IRS, right? 1040, okay, good old 1040. I have somebody who does my taxes for me because it's just gotten way too complicated for me. So if there's anything wrong, he's going down. I'm going to rat him out, What are some ways that we do less than tell the truth to one another? God hates that. God hates that, okay? What else does God hate? Hands that shed innocent blood. Now, there's a number of ways we could go with this, okay? Matthew 5, verses 21 to 23. Okay, let me read that passage for you. Matthew 5, verses 21 to 23. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder. Anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, racha, that's an Aramaic word. It means simply empty head. You ever thought about saying that to somebody? Okay. Don't raise your hands, okay? Don't raise your hands, okay? This is Fifth Amendment country, okay? Don't incriminate yourself. Have you said it to anybody, okay? Don't raise your hand, okay? Whoever says empty head is answerable to the court. Anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fires of hell. In other words, if you're angry with someone without a good cause, you have committed murder in your heart. This is where in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus really gets to the issue here. This is an issue of the heart. Right? Jesus says if a man looks at a woman to lust after her, he has committed adultery with her in his heart. I've always found it interesting. Make of this what you will. Jesus never said if a woman looks at a man to lust after him, she's committed adultery. It never says that. Okay. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Just leave it at that. All right. But by Jesus' definition, I've never committed adultery. I can say that. By Jesus' definition, that's a different set of circumstances, right? And every man is in the same boat with me on that one, okay? If Jesus says, if you commit, I've never killed anybody. Thought about it a few times. Okay, what don't you understand about when I'm driving in the right lane and traffic is merging and I want to get in the left lane, but you sit next to me in the left lane? Why? Okay? Why? Have I had thoughts about killing that person over here? Well, they're trying to kill me, it would seem. Okay? I'm exaggerating, okay? Sort of. the fact is that we've thought about it. In Jesus' mind, to think about it is to do it. You're just as responsible. The problem with Jesus' standards is not, the problem with legalism is not that it goes too far. It doesn't go far enough. I haven't done anything. I haven't actually done, well, but what have you entertained? The basic principle that underlies God's hatred of shedding innocent blood is our sinful tendency to injure others. And it is as possible to commit this sin with the heart as it is with the hands. Now, you have to talk about the taking of unborn human life as part of this. There's no question about that. But there's lots of other ways that we do this. Okay? Hands that shed innocent blood. I don't think any of us have literally in this place done that, but we have probably thought about it. And in God's eyes, that's just as much of a concern. Okay? What else does God hate? A heart that devises wicked schemes. Okay? There's a guy despises rubbing his hands together or thinking about, I have no idea. I don't know who Steve Morgan is. I just saw this picture. I thought it was helpful. So I threw it up there. You can check it out if you want to. Okay? The passage describes the intent of the sin as well as the action of the sin. And once again, Jesus recognized that this distinction, if we allow evil thoughts to take root, they can bring about evil, harmful results. You are what you think. As a man thinks in his heart, thinks in his mind, right? Those are all sort of connected in biblical teaching. So is he. Whatever it is that his thoughts are, in whatever direction his thoughts drive him, that's what he is. Okay? Jesus recognized this distinction. I must not allow evil thoughts to take place in my heart. And it's hard to not do. So, don't devise. And by the way, the more you devise wicked schemes, the easier it becomes. That's the way it is with any sin. You start small, and then after a while, you get this sort of cauterization of your conscience, and then it's just that much easier to go to the next step. And that's the way sin works. It's never enough. One simple sin is never enough. It always wants a second and a third and a fourth, and each one more intense than the previous one. So it's not like, well, I'm just this one time. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay. Number 5, feet that are quick to rush into evil. Okay. Feet that are quick to rush into evil. Feet that are quick to rush into evil can be viewed as the enthusiastic and complete involvement in things that dishonor God. Again, that's not something that you would necessarily do the first time, but it's something that you can get accustomed to. You can begin to sort of focus and move. This happens when we know what to do and we choose not to do it. Scripture talks about that. Scripture talks about, if you know what is right, you don't do it, that's sin. Whatever is not of faith is also sin. But now, see, you're actually in a hurry to do that. You can't wait to rush to do this. Feet that are quick to rush into evil. Okay. Number 6, a false witness that pours out lies. You can see he's got his hand up like he's swearing to the truth, but he's got his fingers crossed back here like, not really. A false witness that pours out lies. A false witness that pours out lies relates to the idea of perjury or deception. This is a person who lacks integrity. Integrity is the faithful support of a standard of values. Integrity, by the way, the word integrity, when you were in math in high school, math class in high school, I know a lot of people think math class in high school is, they need to teach different things, like solving for x, okay? Find x. If such and such equals, if x squared minus 2 equals 74, what is x? Find x, And I saw somebody once wrote online, said, look, x, your x is never coming back. I'm not going to help look for her. It's not going to happen. Okay? My mother-in-law's wisdom on this was always, you can't add numbers or letters. You have to only add numbers. So how can you use letters like what is the value of A? It's a letter, okay? So my mother-in-law hated algebra. I loved it. I thought it was fun. I had a great time with it. I don't know. I just strange that way, okay? Mathematics. You ever remember the term integer? An integer is a whole number. It's not like 1 2/3 or 3.4. it's 5. An integer is a whole number. If you are a person who has integrity, that's like an integer. You are a person who is whole. You are not divided up into parts. In other words, you don't claim to be one thing, but you actually are something else. This is a person who finds lying easier every time they do it. By the way, that's everybody who lies. If you tell a lie one time, it becomes easier to tell a lie a second time, and a third, and a fourth. And not only that, but the lies can become bigger. There's all sorts of ways. I was watching a video this week about a famous celebrity, I won't mention a name, but a famous celebrity who had an issue that caused their premature death. And they kept just denying that there was a problem. No, that's not true. And there was a problem, and this person eventually passed away at a very young age because they probably got to the point, sometimes this sort of thing just takes over. This is the dangerous thing about sin, right? You play with sin, and pretty soon, sin starts playing with you. And sin doesn't play fair. Sin plays very mean. It's very destructive. So, you do this, you do that. Okay, that was fun. Now I can walk away from that. Really? Probably not. Because that's what sin is. A false witness who pours out lies. If you lose your integrity, and by the way, there are a couple ways that you can lose this. One is your credibility, all right? So if maybe you are basically a good person, but you make a mistake, and then someone is seriously hurt emotionally or what have you, and then they've lost trust in you. And then you got to work to get that back. Getting trust back is a very long and difficult process. This is about integrity. This goes beyond that. This is not just that you did something one time on a one-off sort of situation, and now someone you know or people you know think that you really are, and you say, no, I'm not really that way, and you really aren't. But you made a mistake, and it's going to be very difficult for you to sort of salvage your reputation. This is the person who has no integrity. This is the person who has become so habitually involved in telling lies that that's all they know how to do. They're a serial liar. They're a pathological liar. False witness who pours out lies. Doesn't just drop one here or there. So to start, and I think this is where this is different from number 2, which is a lying tongue. A lying tongue, I think, refers to the person who, if they tell a lie, this is what happens. This is someone who that's all they can do. A lot of these people are in politics, okay? On all parties. I'm not just picking on one party. Right? Finally, a person who stirs up conflict in the community, okay? A person who stirs up conflict in the community. Now, we sometimes, one of the more colorful words, I suppose, for this is drama, okay? Drama. My wife and I have both had a lot to do, she obviously more than I, but had a lot to do with theater, okay, at the college level. I was in 4 plays when I was in college, and I did some alumni theater, I did some community theater, number of things like that, and she's worked at a couple different universities, and one of the things that you find with drama people is sometimes they have a lot of drama. There's something about being on stage, okay, that just fuels some people, all right? I've always been amazed, the Greek word hypocrite is, the Greek word is hypokrites, and it's a word that was used to describe actors. What does an actor do? An actor is someone who pretends to be one thing when in fact they're not. Now in acting, that's fun. Right? In fact, I didn't get very many opportunities to do it, but there were a couple times when I got to be in a show where I played an evil person. And you know what the fun thing about playing an evil person is just eviling it up, just really putting it out there. And I remember I was in a play, a play called Incident Vichy, which is an Arthur Miller play. It's about the Nazis and how they, exterminated all kinds of people, not just Jews, but gypsies and other so-called undesirables. And I played a guy named Professor Hoffman from the Race Institute. And basically, the Nazi majors and officers took their directions from him. So my character was the one, if I decided a whole trainload of people were supposed to die, guess what? They died. That's what my character did. And I got done with the show, and of course, in a little college theater sort of presentation, everybody greets you afterwards. And one of my colleagues at the time, she looked at me and she shook my hand and she says, "Oh, I hate you. I just want to kick you in the shins," meaning my character. Okay. I think that's, anyway. No, it was. So, but that was fun. So it's fun, but when you are a hypocrite, then you say you're one thing, but you're actually something else. Okay. I want you to look at Galatians 5:19 to 21. We'll close with this. Galatians 5:19 to 21. You're familiar, you're probably somewhat familiar with this. You're certainly familiar with the passage that follows, which is the fruit of the Spirit. Okay? Verse 22 says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness, and self-control." All right, those 9 virtues. But before you get to those in 5:22, in 5:19 to 21, you have the works of the flesh. So there's the fruit of the Spirit and the works of the flesh, and those phrases are appropriate. Now look at 19:21. "The acts of the flesh, or the works of the flesh, are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity and debauchery, idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. I warn you, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God." Now, I want you to notice here, those who stir up conflict in the community, right? Here's what Galatians 5:19 to 21 contains: sins of certain classifications. It contains, for example, sins of sexual immorality. Right? And we are told to hate that. And the sexual immorality, impurity, and debauchery. Right? Idolatry and witchcraft. Right? There's dangers there. Idolatry and witchcraft. And then you have drunkenness. And, I grew up in a Baptist church, so I heard preaching on drunkenness a lot. I did. And that's not a criticism necessarily. It might have been disproportionate at some point. But then you have drunkenness, and then orgies, sexual immorality tends to go with those sorts of things. And then I put and that's what this is. Right after witchcraft, he says this: hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, and factions, and envy. I don't remember hearing very many sermons against those when I was growing up. I heard a lot of sermons about getting drunk. I heard a lot of sermons against sexual immorality and witchcraft. I heard a lot of sermons about, those sorts. But I didn't hear very much. I think if I count my numbers correctly, there's 15 sins in this section. 8 of them have to do with essentially stirring up conflict in the community. That's over half. So when he says hatred, discourse, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, okay? That's 8. That means, essentially, for all practical purposes, half of the sins that we commit are sins that result in causing conflict within the community. Conflict between ourselves and someone else. Conflict among groups, okay? Every church that I've been in, I've seen that. Again, we just have it. It's just something that we always do. We just have to deal with it, and we can deal with it, and God can forgive us every bit as much as he can for other things. But we need to, this is, there's something, when you make a list like this, the last thing you mention is the one that people remember. Just remember this. I'm going to leave you with this. Remember this, all right? Sins, those who stir up conflict in the community. There's a story that's told about when the Romans, when the Jews back in the late, middle toward the end of the first century, when they decided they were going to get their troops together and they were going to fight the Romans, right? Which is kind of like us getting a basketball team together and playing the Lakers, The Pistons, we might have a chance, but, no. And there was one point where the Roman general, Israel had walled themselves in the city because they had city walls to protect themselves. And they were they were arguing among themselves how best to fight the Romans. But they were doing more than arguing. They were actually fighting among themselves as to how best to fight the Romans. And some of them were actually killing each other over how best to fight the Romans. You catch the irony of that? And when the Roman general was essentially asked, well, why aren't we attacking? His statement was this: I'm not going to risk you guys and your lives when we can just wait out here and let them destroy each other. That's what the devil will do with us, okay? If we stir up conflict within the community, he doesn't have to oppose us because we're already opposing ourselves. Who wants to show up on Sunday morning at a church where people are constantly snipping at each other and causing conflict? Who's going to hang around for that? The enemy's got bigger things to worry about than that. We'd be taking care of that ourselves. Now again, I've seen it everywhere. Just it's because what we are. It's what we're human. We need to constantly work on getting rid of these struggles that we have with sin. There are 7 things that God hates. Very important that we understand what those are. God hates haughty eyes, pride. He hates a lying tongue. He hates hands that shed innocent blood. He hates a heart that devises wicked schemes. He hates feet that are quick to rush into evil. He hates a false witness who consistently pours out lies. And he also hates those who cause conflict in the community. Those are the things we need to avoid. So I just would encourage you to take this passage, look at it, and say, how can this apply to me, to each one of us? Let's pray. Father, thank you for this passage and for what it says. Father, forgive us, forgive me for when I have allowed